Audio by Paper to Audio. The year I stopped paying for Christmas and let 6 o'clock do the talking. At exactly 6:00 on Christmas evening, my phone received 19 calls in less than 8 minutes. I know that because I counted them afterward, sitting in the same chair I'd been sitting in all day, holding the same cup of chamomile tea that had long gone cold. Outside the window of my small rented cottage in the Blue Ridge Mountains, the last pale light was fading behind the trees. A thin blanket of snow covered the yard. The only sounds around me were the creak of the old wooden floorboards settling in the cold and the distant hoot of something wild moving through the pines. Then my phone lit up. One call, then another, then 3 more arriving before I could even read the first name on the screen. My son Raymond, my daughter-in-law Brenda, my daughter Patricia, then Raymond again, then a number I almost didn't recognize until I looked twice. All of them, at once, right on schedule. The strange part wasn't that they were calling. The strange part was that I had known, down to the hour, almost to the minute, exactly when those calls would start. Have you ever been told you ruined something you entirely paid for? Have you ever spent years quietly covering every cost, every bill, every last detail, only to become the one person everyone feels comfortable blaming when something goes slightly wrong? For 11 straight Christmases, I was that person. I am Dorothy Meacham. I am 67 years old. I raised 2 children mostly on my own after my husband Gerald passed, and for the better part of a decade after my son Raymond married a woman named Brenda Calloway, I watched what used to be a warm and simple family Christmas slowly transform into something I no longer recognized. This past Christmas, I made one decision, just one. I stopped paying for all of it. And at 6:00 that evening, sitting alone in a cottage I had rented entirely for myself, I learned exactly what that decision had been worth. But before I tell you what happened when those calls started coming in, let me tell you where all of this truly began. Because what happened at 6:00 Christmas night didn't start in December. It started the afternoon Raymond brought Brenda home to meet me for the very first time, and I made the quiet, terrible mistake of biting my tongue. I want to be careful here. I am not a woman who dislikes people easily. I spent 31 years working as a school administrator. I have managed difficult personalities, navigated impossible situations, and learned when to speak and when to wait. I am not a person who judges quickly. But I am also not a fool. The first time I met Brenda Calloway, she walked into my kitchen, looked around slowly the way someone does when they're calculating the value of things, and said, "Oh, it's cozy in here." She said it the way people say *cozy when they mean *small. Raymond was standing right beside her, watching my face for a reaction. I smiled. I offered her coffee. I set out the good cups, the ones I keep for company, and I made conversation for 2 hours about nothing that mattered. After they left that evening, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Something was wrong. I couldn't point to a single moment and call it the problem. I couldn't say she had been rude, exactly. I couldn't say she had done anything specific. But in the way she spoke to Raymond, that careful, practiced tone that managed to sound like a question while actually being an instruction, I recognized something I had seen before in my years working with difficult people. Brenda Calloway was someone who got what she wanted by making sure the people around her never quite felt settled enough to say no. I told Raymond, gently, a few weeks later. I chose my words the way I always did with him, carefully, honestly, without drama. I told him I thought they should take more time. That I had some concerns, that I simply wanted him to be sure. He listened, he nodded, he told me I had nothing to worry about. 6 months later, they were engaged. I want you to understand something important. I did not stop loving my son the day he married Brenda. I did not stop trying. I attended the wedding. I wore the dress she had, through Raymond, suggested I wear. I sat in the seat she had assigned me, 3rd row, not the front, because the front was reserved for the immediate family on both sides, which apparently did not include the groom's mother. I smiled in every photograph. And when Christmas came that first year, I opened my home, cooked for 2 days straight, and welcomed them both to my table. That was the beginning. The first Christmas wasn't bad. It was careful. That's the only word for it. Brenda was polite at dinner. She complimented the centerpiece. She ate the food I'd prepared without comment, which I took, perhaps naively, as a good sign. But there were small things. The way she redirected Raymond's attention every time he and I fell into easy conversation. The way she would make observations just loud enough for me to hear. I usually don't eat this heavy before bed. Asterisk, or these chairs aren't very comfortable, are they? Asterisk, things that didn't quite qualify as complaints, but settled in the room like them. Raymond didn't notice. Or if he did, he pretended he hadn't. My daughter Patricia was there that year, and she noticed. We didn't talk about it much, but I caught her eyes across the table a few times, and that was enough. By the second Christmas, the dynamic had shifted. Raymond and Brenda had bought a house. It was a nice house, large, new construction, in a suburb about 40 minutes from where I lived. And somehow, without anyone quite announcing it, the location of Christmas changed. We would be going to them now. I did not object. I told myself it made sense. They had the space. I was getting older, it was practical. What I did not understand yet was that asterisk going to them would not mean being a guest. It would mean being a resource. The first year in their house, Brenda mentioned, around October, that the holidays were expensive and that Raymond's company had had a slow quarter. Could I possibly contribute to the Christmas dinner? I said, of course. I sent a check. The following year, she mentioned that they were thinking of having more people this time. Raymond's work friends, a few neighbors, her sister's family, and that things might get a little costly. I sent a larger check. Year after year, the list of people attending grew. The expectations expanded. What had started as a family dinner became something closer to a production. Catered appetizers. A decorated tree that Brenda hired someone to assemble. Christmas Eve gifts that were not put under the tree unless they met an unspoken standard of presentation, wrapped in specific paper, with specific ribbon in specific sizes. And every year, when something fell short, when the rolls were too brown, or the gift wasn't quite right, or the timing of dinner was off, Brenda would find a way to loop me into the explanation. Dorothy, did you confirm that delivery? Mom, Brenda said you told her you'd handle the desserts. What happened? I thought you were bringing the good tablecloth, Dorothy. I was never just a guest. I was never just Raymond's mother. I was a staffing solution, invisible when things went well, visible only when something went wrong. For 11 years, I covered costs I was never asked about directly, only expected to absorb. I managed details I was never thanked for, only criticized when they weren't perfect. I sat at a table in my son's house, in a seat that was always slightly off to the side, and I told myself that this was what love looked like sometimes, that this was the price of staying close to Raymond. I told myself that right up until the Christmas that finally broke something loose inside of me. Last Christmas should have felt like a victory. I had done everything right. I had sent the check Brenda requested in October, $1,400, which she said would help cover the catering and the extra daycare. I had bought Raymond a leather travel bag he'd mentioned once, months earlier, offhandedly, the way people do when they're not really expecting anything. I had bought Brenda a cashmere wrap in the color she had specifically said she liked during a conversation she apparently did not remember having with me. I arrived on time. I brought flowers for the table. I complimented the house. For a few hours, it looked like it might actually work. Then Brenda opened my gift. She held the cashmere wrap up slowly, turning it over in her hands. There was a pause, just a beat too long, and then she said, "Oh, it's the gray one." Raymond looked up. "You don't like gray." "No, I like gray," she said, with a smile that contained no warmth. I thought I'd mentioned I was going through a whole new color palette, but it's lovely, Dorothy, really." The room moved on. Conversation resumed. More gifts were opened. Wine was poured. But I sat there with the specific, hollow feeling of someone who has tried very hard and been told, without quite being told, that it wasn't enough. Later in the evening, When most people had drifted into the living room and I was helping clear the dinner table, I overheard Brenda in the kitchen talking to her sister. She didn't lower her voice very much. "She means well," Brenda said. "She just doesn't really understand how we do things." Her sister murmured something. "Every year it's something," Brenda continued. "Raymond won't say anything because she's his mother, but honestly, Christmas is just easier when we handle it ourselves. She always finds a way to make it about her." I stood in the doorway with a stack of dinner plates in my hands, and I did not move for a long moment. I make it about myself. I, who had sent $1,400 in October. I, who had driven 40 minutes in the cold. I, who had bought gifts based on things she'd mentioned in passing and been gently humiliated for getting slightly wrong. I set the plates down carefully on the sideboard. I walked back to the dining room. I sat down. I picked up my wine glass. And quietly, without announcing it to anyone, I made a decision. Next year, I decided, they would get exactly what they paid for. Not a dramatic decision, not a revenge scheme, just a simple, clear boundary that I drew in my own mind and intended to keep. I want to pause here and ask you something. If you had been standing in that hallway, holding those plates, hearing those words, what would you have done? Would you have walked into that kitchen and said something? Would you have gone home and cried? Would you have swallowed it the way I had swallowed 1,000 smaller versions of it before? Tell me in the comments, because the answer I chose took me the better part of 11 months to fully commit to. And it started not with anger, but with something quieter than that. It started with finally listening to myself. By September, the family group chat had reactivated. It happened the same way every year. A few messages, a few ideas floated, and then before long, a fully formed plan that everyone had contributed to except the person being counted on to pay for it. Brenda sent the first message. A link to a large rented estate house about an hour outside the city, 6 bedrooms, catered holiday packages available, a private chef option for Christmas dinner. Beautiful photographs. Significant price tag. Thinking something like this for this year. Raymond loves it. Dorothy, you'd have your own room this time. Your own room. As though I had been sleeping on the floor at previous Christmases. Raymond sent a thumbs-up emoji. Patricia, my daughter, who had spent years navigating her own discomfort with all of this, sent a careful asterisk, looks nice. Nobody mentioned cost. Nobody mentioned who would be booking it. Nobody mentioned deposits or deadlines, or whether any of this had been discussed with the one person who had covered the bill every year for a decade. The old version of me would have said something, pushed back, asked questions, made myself uncomfortable by making them uncomfortable. This time, I said nothing. I read the messages, I closed the app, I went back to my evening. Days passed, then weeks. Messages accumulated. Brenda sent a follow-up about the catering options. Raymond forwarded something about a nearby Christmas market they could visit. Brenda's sister was apparently joining this year, and her family too, which meant more rooms would be needed, which Brenda mentioned only in passing, as though it were a minor logistical footnote. Nobody asked me if any of this was confirmed. Nobody asked whether the deposit had been paid. Nobody sent me a single direct message that said, "Dorothy, are you handling this?" Because they didn't think they needed to ask. For 11 years, I had made sure they never needed to ask. Now I was watching that machinery operate entirely on its own, running on the fuel of assumption, moving confidently toward a Christmas that existed only in a group chat and not in any confirmed reservation system anywhere. As November turned into December, I received an email from the estate rental company. A deposit was due. Without it, the reservation would be released. I read the email twice. Then I closed it. I opened my own browser and searched for something completely different, something small, something quiet, something that was mine. I found a 2-room cottage in the Blue Ridge Mountains, available over the Christmas week, with a fireplace and a little wooden porch that looked out over the snow-covered hills. The listing said it was pet-friendly. I have a cat named Arthur who has been my faithful companion for 6 years, and who, unlike most people I've dealt with at Christmas, has never once made me feel like I'd done something wrong. I booked it immediately, paid in full, printed the confirmation and put it on my refrigerator where I could see it every morning. Then I finished my tea and went to bed. 1 week before Christmas, I packed a small bag, loaded Arthur into his carrier, settled him in the back seat with a blanket he favors, and drove south. The cottage was everything the listing had promised and nothing more. 1 bedroom, low ceilings, a small kitchen with a gas stove, a fireplace that took 3 tries to catch but burned beautifully once it did. Arthur explored every corner within the first hour and then selected a spot on the windowsill where he could monitor the bird feeder outside with professional concentration. The first evening, I made myself soup from things I'd brought from home. I sat in an armchair by the fire. I read 40 pages of a novel I'd been meaning to finish since August. At no point did anyone need anything from me. That sounds like a small thing. It was not a small thing. For 11 years, the holidays had been a sustained exercise in anticipating everyone else's needs, managing everyone else's comfort, and quietly absorbing everyone else's disappointments. Even in my own home, in the early years, I had spent Christmas Day in a state of low-level tension, waiting for something to go wrong, preparing my apology in advance for whatever it turned out to be. Here, in this small cottage in the mountains, there was nothing to manage, nothing to apologize for. Arthur knocked a decorative pinecone off the windowsill and looked at me with complete indifference, and that was the most dramatic thing that happened all day. Christmas morning arrived cold and bright. I made eggs. I took Arthur to the window to watch the snow. I called Patricia, who spent Christmas with her husband's family but who always made time for me, and we talked for nearly an hour, really talked, the way we used to before holiday logistics had consumed every conversation in the month of December. She asked how I was doing. I told her honestly that I was doing better than I had in years. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good, Mom, that's really good." I spent the afternoon reading by the fire. Arthur slept across my feet. I drank tea and watched the light change on the hills and felt, for the first time in longer than I could easily measure, like the holidays were something happening asterisk for asterisk me rather than something happening asterisk to asterisk me. But all afternoon, I kept glancing at the clock. Not with anxiety, with a particular kind of awareness. Because I knew the schedule. I had attended enough of these Christmases to know exactly how it went. They would travel in the afternoon. They would arrive at the estate around 5:30. They would begin the check-in process around 6. And that was when they would discover that there was nothing to check into. At 6:02, my phone lit up. Raymond, I watched it ring. It stopped, started again. Brenda's name appeared, then Raymond again, then a number I recognized as Brenda's sister, then Raymond again, twice in a row, as though pressing the button harder might produce a different result. I set my teacup down. I picked up the phone and looked at the notifications accumulating on the screen. 19 calls in 8 minutes. I opened one of the texts from Raymond. It read, "Mom, call me right now." A text from Brenda, "Dorothy, what is happening? The company says no reservation exists. Please call immediately." Another from Raymond, "There's no record of any booking. Nobody can reach the rental company after hours. Where are you? Did you handle this? Did you handle this?" I read that sentence 3 times. Even now, even in this moment, even standing in a parking lot outside an estate house they had planned and selected and circulated in a group chat without once confirming who would be paying for it, even now, the instinct was to call me, to ask if I had asterisk handled it. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I listened to Raymond's voicemail. His voice was tight. He was trying to sound calm and not succeeding. He explained that the rental company had no active reservation under any name, that the catering company they had contacted about the holiday package had confirmed that no deposit had ever been received, and their booking had been released in November. That there were 12 people, 12, because Brenda's extended family had apparently been added in the weeks since anyone had checked with me, standing outside with luggage in the cold. 12 people. I had not been informed that the gathering had grown to 12 people. I closed the voicemail. I poured fresh tea. I returned to my armchair. Outside my window, the last light was going silver over the hills. Arthur had moved from the windowsill to my lap at some point and was now asleep with the specific intensity of a creature who has never once worried about anything. My phone continued vibrating on the side table. Call, message, call, message, call. For 11 years, I had rushed to answer every version of this. Every last-minute problem, every unexpected complication, every crisis that arrived because someone had assumed I would prevent it. I had smoothed things over and solved things and covered costs and absorbed blame and told myself that this was what keeping the family together required. I sat very still, and I let the phone vibrate. Sometimes the most complete answer you can offer is the one you don't give. And at 6:00 that Christmas evening, in a small cottage in the mountains, with a sleeping cat on my lap and a fire burning low in the grate, I let the silence say everything I hadn't been able to say for 11 years. I answered eventually, nearly an hour later, when the calls had slowed to something more intermittent. Raymond's voice, when he came on the line, had moved past urgency into something flatter, exhausted. He told me they had found 2 hotel rooms nearby, not enough for everyone, so Brenda's family had driven back toward home. The Christmas dinner had been abandoned. They were ordering delivery to the hotel. He asked me where I was. I told him I was in a cottage in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and that I was fine, and that Arthur was fine. A long pause. Then, Mom, what happened to the reservation? And I asked him, very calmly, the same question I had been waiting 11 years to ask. Raymond, who booked it? Silence. Who paid the deposit? Raymond. More silence. Because I received the emails, I saw the reminders, and I made a decision this year that whoever planned the Christmas would be the one to pay for it. I assumed that when no one contacted me directly, not once, in 3 months, it meant someone else had handled it. He started to say something about assumptions, about how things had always worked, about how I knew what the expectation was. And I said, gently, the thing I should have said years before. Yes, I did know what the expectation was. That's exactly why I stopped meeting it. There was a long pause on the line. I told him what I told him, not with anger. I want you to understand that. Not with satisfaction, exactly. With the particular tiredness of someone who has waited a very long time to be honest. I told him that for 11 years I had paid for Christmases I was criticized at, that I had covered costs I was never thanked for, that I had managed details and absorbed blame and sat at tables in rooms I had entirely funded while being made to feel like I was the one causing problems, that I had heard myself described in his own kitchen as someone who made Christmas difficult, and that I had decided quietly that if I was going to be credited with ruining Christmas, I would at least stop financing it. Raymond was quiet for a long time. He did not apologize that night. I did not expect him to. But something shifted in the quality of his silence, some density, some weight, that told me the words had landed somewhere real. The call ended shortly after. Brenda did not speak to me directly that evening. I did not expect that either. The days after Christmas were quiet in ways I had forgotten were possible. There were messages, of course. Some of them were hard to read. Brenda sent something long and carefully worded that managed to frame everything that had happened as a deliberate act of cruelty on my part. Raymond sent a shorter message that was mostly confusion and some hurt, and not much else. Patricia called and said, "Mom, I just need you to know I think you did the right thing." Then she said, "I also think you've been doing the wrong thing for about 11 years, and I should have said something sooner." That made me laugh for the first time in days. As January settled in, the noise quieted. What followed was not a dramatic resolution. Real life rarely provides those. Raymond and I found our way back to something slowly, carefully, in phone calls that were shorter but more honest than any we'd had in years. Brenda remained distant. I accepted that. What I did not accept was the old dynamic. It was gone, and I had no intention of rebuilding it. The following October, no group chat reactivated. No links were sent. No assumptions were made. Patricia and I made our own quiet plans for December, a few days together at her house. Simple meals, no expectations, no performance. It was enough, more than enough. People sometimes ask me, when I tell them pieces of this story, whether I regret it, whether I wish I had handled it differently, whether I feel guilty about 12 people standing in a parking lot in the cold on Christmas evening. And I tell them honestly, I feel sorry that it came to that. I am not sorry that it happened. Because here is what I have come to understand in the year, since that quiet Christmas in the mountains. I was never ruining Christmas. I was never the problem they kept returning to. I was simply the safest target in the room. The one person they knew would absorb the blame without leaving, would cover the cost without requiring gratitude, would return the following year with a check and a smile and a willingness to try again. Generosity without boundaries is not kindness. It is a habit that teaches the people around you that your limits don't exist. And when you finally show them that those limits are real, it will look to them like betrayal. It is not betrayal. It is at last the truth. At exactly 6:00 on Christmas evening, 19 calls arrived in 8 minutes. What they were really asking, underneath the panic, underneath the frustration, underneath the assumption that I would answer and fix it, was a question nobody had ever thought to ask before. Dorothy, what do you need? The cottage answered for me. The silence answered for me. And for the first time in 11 Christmases, so did I.